Welcome to Village Church Connections. I'm David Pavey. Corrie ten Boom, her father and siblings, lived in rooms above a clock shop in Haarlem, the Netherlands, during the Second World War. They were devout Christians, so their faith inspired them to help those in need. They held a deep respect for the Jews, considering them God's ancient people. In May 1940, the German blitzkrieg ran through the Netherlands, and the quiet life of the ten Boom family was changed forever. Corrie's home over the clock shop became a refuge for Jews, the shop making the house an ideal front for these activities. A secret room, no larger than a small closet, was built into Corrie's bedroom behind a false wall. It could hold up to 6 people. When the security sweeps came through the neighborhood, a buzzer in the house would signal danger, allowing the refugees a little over 1 minute to seek sanctuary in the hiding place. The entire ten Boom family became active in the Dutch resistance, risking their lives by harboring those hunted by the Gestapo. Corrie became a leader in the movement, overseeing a network of safe houses in the Netherlands. Through these activities, it was estimated that the lives of 800 Jews were saved. On February 28, 1944, however, a Dutch informant told the Nazis of the ten Boom's activities, and the Gestapo raided the home. The entire family was arrested, although the German soldiers didn't find the half-dozen Jews safely concealed in the hiding place. Almost 3 days later, they were rescued by the Dutch underground. All ten Boom family members were incarcerated, including Corrie's 84-year-old father, who soon died in prison. Corrie and her sister Betsy were imprisoned in the notorious Ravensbrück concentration camp near Berlin. Betsy died there on December the 16th, 1944. 12 days later, Corrie was released for reasons unknown. Corrie ten Boom returned to the Netherlands after the war and set up a rehabilitation center for concentration camp survivors. As a Christian, she even took in those who had cooperated with the Germans during the occupation. In 1946, she began a worldwide ministry that took her to more than 60 countries. She received many tributes, including being knighted by the Queen of the Netherlands. In 1971, she wrote a best-selling book entitled The Hiding Place, which was made into a movie in 1975. In 1979, I had the opportunity to visit the clock shop in Haarlem, in the good company of my 12-year-old son, John. We stood there in the street and tried to picture what had taken place in that home less than 40 years previously. Since then, the home has been made into a museum, while the shop is still in business. In 1947, Corrie had an experience that contains a challenge. Let me recount it for you now in her own words. It was in a church in Munich that I saw him. A balding, heavy-set man in a grey overcoat, a brown felt hat clutched between his hands. People were filing out of the basement room where I had just spoken, moving along the rows of wooden chairs to the door at the rear. It was 1947, and I had come from Holland to defeated Germany with the message that God forgives. It was the truth they needed most to hear in that bitter, bombed-out land, and I gave them my favorite mental picture. Maybe because the sea is never far from a Hollander's mind, I liked to think that that's where forgiven sins were thrown. When we confess our sins, I said, God casts them into the deepest ocean, gone forever. The solemn faces stared back at me, not quite daring to believe. There were never questions after a talk in Germany in 1947. People stood up in silence collected their wraps, and in silence left the room. And that's when I saw him working his way forward against the others. One moment I saw the overcoat and the brown hat. The next, a blue uniform and a visored cap with its skull and crossbones. It came back with a rush. The huge room with its harsh overhead lights. The pathetic pile of dresses and shoes in the center of the floor. The shame of walking naked past this man. I could see my sister's frail form ahead of me, ribs sharp beneath the parchment skin. Betsy and I had been arrested for concealing Jews in our home during the Nazi occupation of Holland. This man had been a guard at Ravensbrück concentration camp where we were sent. Now he was in front of me, hand thrust out. A fine message, Fräulein. How good it is to know that, as you say, all our sins are in the bottom of the sea. And I, who had spoken so glibly about forgiveness, fumbled in my pocketbook rather than take his hand. He wouldn't remember me, of course. How could he remember one prisoner among those thousands of women? But I remembered him, and the leather crop swinging from his belt. It was the first time since my release that I had been face to face with one of my captors, and my blood seemed to freeze. You mentioned Ravensbrück in your talk, he was saying. I was a guard there. No, he didn't remember me. But since that time, he went on, I have become a Christian. I know that God has forgiven me for the cruel things that I did there. But I would like to hear it from your lips as well. Fräulein, again the hand came out. Will you forgive me? And I stood there, I whose sins had every day to be forgiven, and could not. Betsy had died in that place. Could he erase her slow, terrible death simply by asking? It could not have been many seconds that he stood there, hand held out, but to me it seemed hours as I wrestled with the most difficult thing I had ever had to do. For I had to do it, I knew that. The message that God forgives has a prior condition, that we forgive those who have injured us. If you do not forgive men their trespasses, Jesus said, neither will your Father in heaven forgive you your trespasses. I knew it, not only as a commandment of God, but as a daily experience. Since the end of the war, I had a home in Holland for the victims of Nazi brutality. Those who had been able to forgive their enemies were also able to return to the outside world and rebuild their lives, no matter what the physical scars. Those who nursed bitterness remained invalids. It was as simple and as horrible as that. And still I stood there with the coldness clutching my heart. But forgiveness is not an emotion. I knew that too. Forgiveness is an act of the will. And the will can function regardless of the temperature of the heart. Jesus, help me, I prayed silently. I can lift my hand. I can do that much. You supply the feeling. And so, woodenly, mechanically, I thrust my hand into the one stretched out to me. And as I did, an incredible thing took place. The current started in my shoulder, raced down my arm, and sprang into our joined hands. And then this healing warmth seemed to flood my whole being, bringing tears to my eyes. I forgive you, brother, with all my heart, I cried. For a long moment, we grasped each other's hands, the former guard and the former prisoner. I had never known God's love so intensely as I did then. And thank you for tuning in once again to Village Church Connections.